All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Optimize and AppSy joint webinar. So today we're talking about how to optimize mobile onboarding like a pro. So my name is Kendrick Wang. I do product marketing here at Optimize, and I'm here with Zahi. Zahi, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Kendrick. Thanks. So thank you for having this webinar with us. I also wanted to thank everyone that have joined us today to learn a little bit more on how to create a great onboarding experience with A/B testing and user experience analytics. And we have a few very exciting things to show you today. So thank you very much for joining, and back to you, Kendrick.
All right, let's get started talking about what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing is why onboarding? So why is user onboarding important? We're also going to talk about some of the top onboarding methods that some of the best apps out there are using today. We're also going to talk about the app optimization cycle, which you can repeatedly use to improve your product. And also we're going to talk about testing and analysis, both qualitative and quantitative, with Optimize and AppSy. So let's get started. So one of the big problems in mobile today is that 25% of users are abandoning an app after just a single session, and that's a really big problem. So you can't grow your app if users aren't engaging. So what you really need to do is show users the app value quickly and clearly, or else they're going to leave and never come back. So what is user onboarding? User onboarding is the process of turning downloads into engaged users. Think of it as an entry ramp for people using your app. You want to funnel them into the high value propositions and turn them into active and engaged users. So what does user onboarding or mobile onboarding look like? Let's take a few good examples. So the first example we have is Uber, and they do what's called value-oriented onboarding. So Uber has a few set of screens here that really convey a few specific things about the app. First, what does the app do? How can the user integrate it into their life? And what value is this going to provide? So you can see that Uber talks about setting a pickup location, confirming payment, and making a graceful exit. So they want to transition users as easily and as seamlessly as possible to get them to start using the app. The second way we can do it is by interactive tutorials. So Mailbox does a really good job of this. A lot of people, like myself included, learn a lot better when we're doing hands-on learning. So Mailbox really takes this to heart in their onboarding process. So as soon as you open Mailbox, they get you interacting and doing things with the app, clicking on buttons and trying out the different features. So this really shows you how to use the app and gets you that kind of interactive feel and learning process. The third way is by progressive onboarding. So progressive onboarding allows you to slowly introduce new features and functionalities of the app as the user go. So it's basically triggered functions that when something new happens, they talk more about how the feature works. And this really helps to prevent users from getting overwhelmed by the plethora of features that you may have in your app. So how do we go about creating a really good onboarding process? Well, all the top apps use something that's called the optimization cycle. So it's a very methodical process that allows them to measure, identify, test, and analyze in order to optimize their app. So they start out by measuring what are the possible things are. They start out by measuring the different metrics of their app, identifying what are the possible pain points that they can help improve, test it, and analyze those test data to figure out if an improvement is going to help their app or not. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Zahi, and he's going to tell you a little bit about user experience analytics.
Thanks a lot, Kendrick. So first of all, for those of you that are not familiar with AppSy and user experience analytics, basically AppSy today is the leader in app experience analytics, and we help companies visualize and understand the in-app user journey, both for a single user and also in a more aggregated manner with features like touch heat maps and user flow analysis. I want to give you a very quick tour of the AppSy dashboard just to highlight our key features. So this is the AppSy Analytics dashboard, and probably our most interesting feature is the session replay, where we actually allow companies to visualize remotely how users interact, engage with the app, allowing them to understand every action, every friction point, and every issue users have. And we also provide a more aggregated user experience analysis with our user flows, showing you how users navigate with different parts of the app, and with our touch heat maps, showing you how users engage with each and every screen in your app. And we're going to show in today's webinar how we're actually using these features to help you in the optimization cycle that Kendrick mentioned. But if I want to summarize, then user experience analytics basically helps you bridge the gap between your design and your expectations to the actual user's behavior in your app. And when we're talking about user experience analytics, we're talking about a new set of metrics that you want to measure. So if today you're probably measuring metrics like number of downloads, active users, and conversion rates, UX analytics and metrics are focused in more qualitative side of analysis. So talking about analyzing which types of gestures users perform, where in the screen do they tap, how much time does it take them to create a response in the app, how much time they spend in each and every screen. And obviously these two sets of metrics are very, very important. They complete each other and they help you create a full understanding of the user's journey and in-app experience. So basically today we're going to showcase the optimization cycle on the Runtastic app. Runtastic is a very popular fitness app that helps track sports and fitness activities such as running, jogging, biking, etc. And their specific challenge was optimizing the onboarding experience and the registration rates. So what we're seeing here, this is the Runtastic registration form. And you can see that it has a continue button with a Facebook logo on it. You can see a login button and a join now button. The continue button might be a bit confusing to new users, but what we're seeing here is a very classic pattern of offering both Facebook registration and an email registration. And one of the most important questions regarding onboarding is what type of registration should I offer? So one quick insight we wanted to share with you today. So AppSy has recently conducted a research that included 100 apps to understand what do users prefer when they register a new app. So we've tested apps that offered both Facebook and email registration. And we learned that when offered both, actually 56% of users prefer an email registration over Facebook. Obviously, we can't ignore not a Facebook login and not an email registration, but this is something very important to keep in mind when designing a registration screen. When possible, it is recommended to offer both versions because probably for privacy reasons, users perhaps are concerned in sharing their Facebook details. But when in doubt, test. I think this is one of the main messages we want to get out today in this webinar. Everything you're not sure of, you can test. You can use Optimize to actually run your tests and test your hypothesis. So coming back to the Runtastic app, we actually want to start with the optimization cycle. And the first step of the optimization cycle is actually measuring the metrics that we want to understand and improve. So usually here we would stick to classic metrics like retention, engagement, and conversions. And as Kendrick mentioned, the entire process of onboarding is turning a first-time user into a loyal, engaged user. So obviously the most important thing is to understand our retention rates. Specifically here, we're seeing a cohort retention analysis, and we're seeing how engaged our users over time. Basically, we're seeing here that we have a pretty significant drop-off on the first week, but once we got a user engaged, they usually stick around. So this is one important thing to understand. So obviously we want to improve our 1 week retention. And another interesting metric here, we can see that almost 30% of the users that have used the app once never return to use it again. So this is a first red flag metric that is showing us that we have a problem with our onboarding process. And to move forward to actually measuring the detailed flow, we're actually seeing that we're only converting around 67% from our new users to registered users. Okay, so this is pretty concerning, because these are users that have actually downloaded our app, that actually took the time to download it, but they never completed the registration process. So now comes the part that we've measured the problematic metrics, and usually without applying user experience analytics, you would simply go with your gut feeling or with a guess on what is the change that you want to test. And I think this is the most important part where user experience analytics comes to play, helping you identify those friction points. So going back to the session replay feature, we can actually replay real user sessions of users that have not continued to use the app after visiting the login screen. And when I replay a few of these sessions, I can actually see a repeating pattern of users that are engaging the screen and actually try to swipe past this specific screen, as we see in the timeline. We also have the ability to identify that these gestures are not triggering a response in the app. So perhaps these are users that are looking to continue to move on to the next step. Perhaps they're a bit confused with the messaging or the labeling of the continue button with the Facebook logo. So I think here we've identified a potential problem, and now we can actually zoom out and see an aggregated analysis of our entire user base and see how they engage the login screen. So here we're seeing an unresponsive swipe heat map analysis. So we can see that there is a high concentration of unresponsive gestures in this bottom part of the screen. And we can also see two more important things. The first one is when measuring the average response time in the login screen, we see that it takes 7 seconds for an average user to perform an action on this screen. So this is a fairly long response time. So again, another thing that that makes us think and suspect that there's some sort of a user confusion in this screen. And we can also see that from 100% of visits to the login screen, 14% actually quit the app. So to summarize, we're understanding that there's confusion, and our suspicion goes to users that try to continue to the next step. So we're actually going to try and perform a test, and our hypothesis is that perhaps changing the label on the Facebook button will help us increase our registration and conversions. So now we're going to see how we can actually utilize Optimize to perform an A/B test on the fly. So I'm going to revert back to Kendrick to take us to the next step in the optimization cycle.
All right, thanks, Ahi. All right, so the next thing you want to do is testing. So let me tell you a little bit about Optimize first. So what Optimize allows you to do is fast, intelligent mobile iterations without disrupting the user experience. So we're able to do mobile A/B testing, instant updates, and make sure that you don't disturb the experience by using stage rollout or feature flagging. So why do you want to test? So we really want to test to improve our apps using data. Else, you're not going to know the impact of your changes, and you're just going to follow KPIs and hope that, okay, yeah, the metrics are increased. But what testing allows you to do is draw a direct cause and effect relationship between a change you make in your app and its effects on your user behavior. So this is how testing works. So once you come up with your hypothesis, you can make a change and test it by validating it versus the control or your original version of your app. You can use this to learn from your results and improve your app really quickly. So while the individual CTR of any one experiment may be minor, the compounding net result can be really massive. So we have an example here from Yahoo's growth team who kept running tests such as these and actually got a huge increase. So the first step is to create an MVP, or minimum viable product. You want to test something lightweight just to validate whether this is something that you should pursue or not. So at Optimize, we have what's called the visual editor that allows you to do instant A/B testing without any App Store submission. So I'm going to show you quickly how it might work. So over here, I have Optimize, and I already have the Runtastic app loaded up. So on my right here, I actually have a demo device to show you how this would work in practice. So as Zahi talked about, one of the things that we might want to test is confusing messaging using the Facebook button. So what we can do is simply click on this element in Optimize, and we can actually change a lot of different elements about it. In this case, we want to change the text or a call to action. So we might change continue to log in with Facebook. And you can see it's changed over here on the right instantly. And what we could do is we can instantly deploy this to a small subset of users to test out how it's going to affect conversion rates. So we can also change a bunch of different UI elements as well. So this allows you to really quickly and validate a change without using too many engineering resources. So pretty much anyone from your company could come in and make this change and deploy it to users really quickly. If you want to do more powerful changes, you can pretty much change anything you can dream of using code blocks or dynamic variables, so we can test more complex things such as flows, new features, and so on. And what's really important is we want to test on specific groups sometimes. So say I want to test on people using a Nexus 5 with the languages set as English and Spanish in North America. So we could do that with Optimize, and we could change the distribution to make sure we're not changing the actual app usage for most of our users. So what this really allows you to do is get quantitative data that tells you how your changes are affecting your users. So we can see here the original versus the two different variations, and we can see that there was a somewhat significantly improved difference. So this allows us to validate our changes by deploying to a small percentage of users. And the really big benefit is that we're able to understand the effects before we affect your entire user base. So I'm going to pass it back to Zahi to tell you more about how we can dig into the qualitative data.
Thanks a lot, Kendrick. So we saw how we can very easily measure our bottom line conversion with Optimize and understand if we have a significant change or not. But another very strong point of UX analytics is that we can also try and compare the UX metrics between the two versions we've tested. So now we can look again on the unresponsive swipes heat map, and we can see that the original version had a lot more unresponsive swipes in compared to the change. So we see that in the first UX metric, which is actually better usability, we were able to improve. The second metric that we're seeing here is also the average response time. So we can see that it dropped from 7 seconds to 4 seconds, another reinforcement to the change that we've made. And finally, we can see that now only 7% of visits to the login screen actually end up in an app quit. So we have reinforcements to all the metrics we measured before the test. But what happens if we conduct a test on Optimize and we get a result that is not statistically significant? Okay, so obviously the first option is to wait and keep the test running for a longer period of time. But because we want to make fast and smart business decisions, then UX analytics can actually assist us when we tackle the problem of a test with an insignificant result. So even if we have an insignificant result, we can actually go ahead and measure UX metrics that we've seen, like usability, time on screen, time to first action. We need to understand the flow from the screen and to the screen, and analyzing these different metrics can help us make a smarter and a faster business decision when moving forward in the optimization cycle. So obviously the last step is actually applying the change, and specifically here we've learned that changing the label on the Facebook button actually improved our conversions, and now all we have to do is apply the change to our entire user base. But obviously optimization doesn't end there. We have to continue and measure more metrics and more things that we want to test and optimize. Specifically in our registration screen, we can theoretically test a skip button that will allow users to skip the registration process, and we might see that in the long run we'll have more registered users if we won't force users to register initially. Another thing we can consider testing is one of the options that Kendrick mentioned, either a value tutorial or an interactive tutorial. So again, a lot of things to test, a lot of options, and when applying the optimization cycle, we can actually do that in a very methodical way. So just to very quickly summarize our talk today. So we talked about the importance of mobile onboarding. We saw how we can use user experience analytics to pinpoint a specific problem and then actually perform an effective A/B test. We went over the complete optimization cycle and demonstrated the importance of user experience analytics and A/B testing platforms to actually deliver a change that is beneficial to the users. And we've learned that analyzing both quantitative and qualitative data is important during the optimization cycle. And again, this is a continuous process and that is continuously evolving. So one very important note before we move on to the Q&A section. So actually all the things that you've seen today, for example, the ability to watch session replay for different versions and different variations, the ability to compare different heat maps to different tests is going to be available very soon in the AppSy dashboard once we complete the integration with Aptimize. So we're very close to releasing a beta. So if there are any joint customers that would like to beta test the new integration, then feel free to contact us. We'd be delighted to include you in the testing process of this new integration. Our contact details will appear on the next slide, so feel free to contact us with a request to participate in the beta. So now we're going to move to the Q&A section of the webinar. First of all, feel free to post your questions in the chat window, and we'll try to address all of them. And actually, during Kendrick's talk, I had a few questions that I wanted to start with. So Kendrick, I think one important question that I wanted to start with is, would you recommend running a few tests in parallel or simply running one test at a time? I think it's a very important question.
It really depends on what your goals are. If you're a large company and you have a really large number of MAUs, it might make sense to run things in parallel. So you might choose 10% of users to be in one test and 10% of users to be in another test. What you really want to make sure you're not doing, though, is running multiple tests on the same user base, because you want to make sure that each of these experiments has a direct cause and effect relationship, and putting them into two experiments at once will pollute that data. But running multiple experiments at the same time isn't a problem as long as you make sure to segment them and you have enough users to do so.
Okay, great. One more question. you showed in the demonstration that you're actually only testing on a small subset of the users. So what is the recommended sample size for actually testing or testing your hypothesis initially?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? It didn't come through clearly.
Sure. So what is the recommended sample size, a subset of your users that you would like to initially test your change on?
Okay. So the unfortunate answer is that it depends. So what we do at Optimize is we actually provide a really handy calculator that takes into account all the different factors that might go into it. So for example, how many users you're putting into a test, how long you're going to run the test, and also the confidence interval you're looking for. So the best way to do it would be to go into Optimize and actually use the calculator, which you can do even with like a free account. So all you have to do is go to optimize.com, register for account, and you can check out our calculator.
Okay, thanks. Very interesting.
Okay, we have a question here. I'll just read it out loud. Is it true that all these UI changes and their analysis should be oriented on growing conversions? So do you want to tackle that, Zahi?
Sure. So it's a very good question. So first of all, we need to remember at the end of the day, we have our app, we have our users, and we want our users to complete certain actions in the app that will bring them value. So at the end of the day, I think we are looking to gain a conversion uplift. But as I discussed, I think it was one slide before the summary slide, sometimes even if we don't get a conversion uplift, we can achieve an experience improvement. For example, we can improve the usability, we can improve the time on screen, we can improve engagement. So conversion is probably the most important metric, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I really want to show in onboarding is that there's a real value to the app and show that users really get something out of it. Because like we said earlier, like 25% of users are going to drop off almost immediately. So if you show them that you work really well in their lives and you're actually going to provide value on a regular basis, they'll be more likely to stick around and engage and retain. Okay, let's see, we have another question. So what are the pros and cons between the three onboarding mechanisms briefly discussed? Okay, so I can point out one of the first ones. When we talked about value with the Uber example, so one of the pros is that you're really able to communicate clearly what your app does for your users. And so one of the cons for that is that actually people don't really like to read as much, and sometimes they might be flipping through the screens without looking. So we found that, let's say, well, for example, we did a test with Vivo, and we found that people actually didn't like the onboarding screens. So there's two different possible options. It really depends on what your app user base looks like and what they're looking for. So that's why we were so focused on testing, because what works for a lot of apps, those user onboarding swipe screens, doesn't necessarily work for other apps, such as the case study for Vivo. And if you want to take a look at that, you can Google Optimize in Vivo and case study, and I'm sure it'll pop up.
Actually, it's a very interesting point. We had one customer that offered a tutorial, like an onboarding tutorial, and that tutorial included 9 different screens. And the user had to go through all 9 screens in order to continue and actually start using the app. And when looking at the session replay, we would see that all of the users were swiping very, very quickly. They weren't even reading the tutorial text. So actually, when we removed the tutorial and added a single button that allowed users that wanted to get more information on the app, that actually presented a conversion uplift of around 15%. So obviously, including a tutorial is an important option, and the simple answer is simply test it.
We have another question here. For how long should we run one optimization cycle? Okay, so I'll tackle this first. So usually a test can run, well, tests are determined how long they run by how many users are seeing a certain screen in your app. So let's say for Runtastic, we did this login and call to action change. If we have enough conversions, then we can tell how what the effects are. So there's really no definite answer. Testing does take some time. Usually we recommend about 2 weeks. But going through this process, it's something that you should regularly be doing and just build into your product roadmap.
One question that I received, is it possible to use AppSy to measure interaction with push notifications? So actually the answer is no. We don't have the ability to capture interactions that occur outside the app. So push notifications are considered to be something that is happening in the operating system level and not in the app level. However, we do have a few customers that tag a custom event in the AppSy session timeline with the selection that user has made in the push notification or with the push notification ID. And what this allows them is to filter the recordings based on a specific push notification ID, and then they can actually see the user's engagement either with the heat map or with the recordings very easily.
Okay. So we have an AppSy specific question here. So once an app is released, how do you get started with measuring metrics? What metrics are important to measure, and how do you make these decisions?
So Kendrick, I'll copy one of your answers. It depends. So obviously it depends on the type of the app. If you're developing a social app, then obviously engagement is the most important metric you want to probably monitor. If you're developing an e-commerce app, then probably conversion is the most important metric you want to follow. If you're developing a video engagement platform, then perhaps this average session length is what you're trying to improve. So it really depends on the specific type of app. But obviously there are common metrics that are important to all app developers, like number of daily active users, retention rates, average engagement time. So actually, if you're looking for more information on that, we have an ebook on appsy.com/ebooks. The name of the ebook is Which Key Metrics You Need to Measure in Your App. So if you're looking for more information on that, feel free to download our ebook.
Okay, we also have a couple Optimize specific questions, so I'll answer them as I go. So what are the performance and data use costs for integrating Optimize tools? So as for performance, there's actually very little noticeable difference for users. So what we do is we make sure we download the experiment data beforehand, so it's preloaded on the user apps before they ever launch it. So that way they don't have to wait for us to download as soon as they open up the app. So it's all being done in the background, so there's no noticeable difference on that side. And we have another one about the app label changes we made. So it's not an IDE, it's actually an SDK that you install in your app and it allows you to make these changes. And as a follow-up, how is it that we don't need to publish via the App Store for these changes? Is it a private beta audience you're referring? So actually, anyone that installs Optimize can change any UI element on the fly without submitting. So it's kind of our secret sauce here at Optimize, but you're able to select different UI elements and push it out immediately to your users. If you want, we can actually give you a live demo on your app. Of course, we won't push out the actual changes, but we can show you exactly what we can do on your app.
There's one question here regarding Optimize and AppSy working together on a low bandwidth internet connection. So I can relate to AppSy. One of the settings in the AppSy dashboard is when do we want to track and upload the user experience data that we capture. And by default, we are only capturing and uploading data when the user is on a Wi-Fi connection. So on our end, it's completely configurable through the dashboard, and I'm pretty sure that Optimize bandwidth impact is very low, but I'll let Kendrick follow up on that.
Yeah, we actually do the exact same thing. Okay, so what is the best way to onboard the consumer? Should we directly take the user to the app and let them experience it, or start with a guided tour?
So
you can go ahead.
So I think our webinar today is the answer to that. So you have to test. Again, we have different apps, different users. You have to understand what works best for your app. So you simply have to apply the optimization cycle. You can have two versions of the app, one going straight to the actual content and one offering a guided tour, and you can simply test which one performs better. I think this is the best answer. Kendrick, feel free to add on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like with our Vivo test, we were actually all really surprised that our onboarding tutorial hadn't worked really well for Vivo, and by removing it, they actually got more registrations and logins. So you really have to test these things out, and you want to do it as quickly as possible. One other suggestion that I might have is we've provided an ebook on different onboarding techniques you can use, so including the ones mentioned above as well as a bunch of others, and we can get that to you. So I'll go ahead and make sure that we send that specific ebook to you after this webinar.
And to follow up on that, we have another ebook that showcases 5 of the most popular user experience mistakes done in the onboarding process, available in our website as well.
Okay. So we have another one for you, Zahi. How do you decide whether a quantitative metric is significant and you need to impact a change to improve it?
So again, I think one very important feature that today is lacking from the AppSy dashboard is benchmarking. So for example, if you're looking at a qualitative metric, you don't know if it's a good result or a bad result. You can compare it to other sections in your app, but it's very difficult to know whether or not it's a good or bad result. And I feel here common sense is probably your best tool. If we're looking at a 10-second response time in a specific screen, then that's probably not a good thing. So I think here it's, again, there's no silver bullet, there's no magic formula. You just need to use your common sense. And I think here the session replay is actually a very good place to start. You can actually see a session, you can understand whether or not the user is happy with the app and with the interface, with the design, with the layout, or not.
Okay. Here's another one. What are standard industry conversion rates for onboarding screens? I actually don't know this off the top of my head. Do you, Zahi? I haven't seen any numbers published specifically about this.
Mm-hmm. So no, but I can share one stat I have in front of me. So a lot of apps today are using SMS verification to activate their apps, specifically chat apps or social apps. So in that area, you should expect at least an 80% completion rate. If you're below that for SMS activation or email activation, then you're definitely you have a lot of room for improvement, but this is only for SMS activation, and it really varies between different categories, but this is the one stat I can share.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Do you have anything else to add, Zahi? Any last words?
No, I just wanted to thank Kendrick and the entire Optimize team for working very hard on this webinar, for including us in it, and hopefully all the people that have attended will apply the optimization cycle and the methodology we've introduced in the webinar today.
Yeah, same here as well. It's a pleasure working with you guys. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me at kendrick@aptimize.com. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. All right. Well, if that's all, well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and we'll hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.